Welcome back. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Well, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer is on the way out, and Obamacare is still the law of the land. Spicer resigned in a disagreement over the hiring of new White House comms director Anthony Scaramucci, and Obamacare looks to remain the law of the land now that Senators Susan Collins of Maine, Mike Lee of Utah, Jerry Moran of Kansas, and Rand Paul of Kentucky announced that they would block even the opening of debate on an alternative to Obamacare, on one that was backed by 47 of the Senate's 52 Republicans. These 4 Republican senators, with assists from Republicans Dean Heller of Nevada and Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, unraveled the delicate compromise stitched together by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. And what's left is, well, Obamacare. Absent some sort of legislative Lazarus, Obamacare, or actually Obama, Collins, Lee, Moran, Paul care, remains the law of the land. Spicer's departure caused a lot of news, but the real story is that if McConnell can't put the GOP's health care Humpty Dumpty together again, the centerpiece of Republican appeals for power in D.C. from 2010 forward is overturned, and with it, Republican credibility as a governing party. Joining me now for both autopsy and prophecy are Paige Winfield Cunningham of the Washington Post. She covers health policy and authors the Post Daily Tip Sheet, Health 202, and Hadas Gold, media reporter for Politico. Welcome, Paige. Welcome, Hadas. Hadas, let me start with you. Big shakeup at the White House. But I don't want to overlook the fact that Sarah Huckabee Sanders joins Dana Perino and Dee Dee Myers as White House press secretary, yeah. And that's a big deal. And there are a lot of those. Sarah Isker Flores at Justice, Charmaine Yost at HHS. Are you surprised by how many women are giving voice to the Trump administration's message? Not necessarily, especially if you look at the amount of white women who supported the president in the election. You're right that Sarah Huckabee Sanders is the 3rd woman to be the press secretary. It's kind of shocking. You'd think there would have been more women by now at the podium. There have been more communications directors, not as many press secretaries, but that has been overlooked in all of this drama surrounding Anthony Scaramucci being named. And you have to remember, Scaramucci's not necessarily going to be the one at the podium every day. It's going to be Sarah Sanders. And how does she connect with you and with everyone else in that room? How does she do? Well, people say that she still sometimes goes on these, fake news rants against the media, but she's not as necessarily personally insulting as sometimes Sean could be to the reporters in the room. And she wasn't as, you didn't feel as much of the anger sort of vibrating off of her as you did sometimes with Sean. She's a little bit more of a calmer presence, and within the White House, she seems pretty well liked. Now, Paige, all this coming and going in the West Wing, does it have any impact at all? Would it have mattered if Anthony Scaramucci had been there for the last 3 weeks to the health care bill's passage in the Senate? Well, Trump has really floundered along the way as he's been trying to get Republicans on board, and you saw him bring them into the White House again Wednesday, expressing a lot of frustration that they weren't able to even get the votes on this bill. And the whole thing got even more complicated this week policy-wise, because the parliamentarian is now saying a lot of parts of this bill can't even stay in, and so it's really hard at this point to see a pathway forward. But the White House is still putting a lot of pressure on conservative groups to try to pressure conservatives, and I think they realized this would be seen as kind of a big loss and a big walking back of some of their political promises if they can't make this happen. Oh, it's a huge loss, but I'm wondering how much of it is owned by President Trump. I think very little. I think it's on Mike Lee and Rand Paul and Jerry Moran. Susan Collins less so. She was never going to be a part of this. Does Mitch McConnell have any magic left? Can he pull something out of the hat here? It's really hard to see at this point, honestly. Even sure if he has the votes to start debate on this bill. Senators left town really frustrated this week. They didn't even know which measure, whether they'd be voting on a repeal bill, only bill, or a repeal replace bill next week. And then, of course, you have Senator McCain, and we're not sure when he can come back, which would be a crucial vote. And so there's a lot of pieces, and it's really hard to see how McConnell could put it together. Hadas, did the Republicans blow the messaging? They did not really spend much time at the White House or on the Hill doing other than Paul Ryan saying it's a rescue mission. Did they blow this telegraphing of what was the need? You had confusing messaging from the White House, because sometimes you got the impression that the president preferred repeal, straight repeal, let Obamacare fail. Sometimes they said, as Sarah Sanders said yesterday, that the president prefers a repeal and replace. There wasn't a clear messaging coming out of there. While the president might have been involved, talking to senators, talking to people on the Hill, trying to get them all together, it didn't feel as though he was necessarily advocating for it as much as president as maybe he should be. And perhaps that's something that Scaramucci can do. He's talked about how he recognized there was a disconnect between the president and between what the media writes about and what the public thinks about the president and the White House. And he said that his goal is to bring those two together. So as director of communications, that's going to be his whole goal. What do you see as the framing of why it is in such trouble right now? Who is responsible in the world of a media reporter? Who do you put the finger on as having killed the McConnell deal?
It really seems to just be the lack of an organizing principle, the lack of sort of a clear push amongst everybody to get together and work towards the singular goal. It seems like everybody seems to be running around and doing their own thing, and it's the Democrats and other people who don't want to see Obamacare repealed are utilizing those weaknesses, it seems. But ultimately, it seems as though Capitol Hill seems to be getting most of the blame for this, not so much the White House, because of their inability, as Paige said, to even get a vote on debate.
Autopsy, Paige Cunningham. And maybe too early. Who knows? McConnell brings us up. Who killed the McConnell compromise?
You're going to see blame coming from all sides. You know, the moderates are going to point the finger at conservatives, saying they wanted to repeal too many protections for people. The conservatives say that the moderates aren't willing to repeal Obamacare, even though they had said for years that they were going to. And, you know, Republicans aren't going to be able to get away from this problem. Even if, you know, they fail on a vote next week, they're still going to have to do something about the marketplaces next year, which are facing some trouble. They're going to have to do something about these cost-sharing subsidies, about, you know, the White House is going to have to be clear on whether it's going to enforce the individual mandate. And so this problem is still going to haunt them for some time.
Senator Hatch blamed Mike Lee, his colleague from Utah, and said he was surprised that Mike Lee just couldn't be satisfied. Is that the one that's going to stick, that Mike Lee was part of the Cruz-Lee amendment, everyone was on board, it was going to work, and then suddenly he walked off stage right, way right?
It was really surprising when Lee was the one who came out against it, because you're right. He and Cruz had kind of gotten together, and their big point was they want to see a bill that brings premiums down. And it is true that this bill they're considering would lower premiums to a degree in the future, because insurers would be able to sell leaner plans. And so it's a little bit unclear why he kind of chickened out at the end. And, you know, and the conservative groups were putting pressure on him to, you know, hold fast and say all of Obamacare needs to be repealed, and that's why they had pushed for these extra opt-outs for insurers. And so now he's kind of going along with this repeal-only idea. And so now McConnell seems to be swayed by that and is even considering bringing that to the floor. That probably wouldn't pass either.
Hadas, very quickly, how often do you see a senator, or in Hatch, take a whack at a senator, Mike Lee? That's not widely done when they're both in the same party in the same state. What's it tell you?
It tells me that there's incredible frustrations, obviously, within the Republican senators right now, and it just, everything's bubbling to the surface, and it also seems sort of like a pressure campaign. If you can't do it behind the scenes, then do it publicly. But it doesn't really look good for the Republicans if within the same state two senators are arguing with one another, when really you need everybody on board, desperately everybody on board, to get this done.
A real problem. Paige Winfield Cunningham, Hadas Gold, thank you both for